How did Congress meet the government's need for more troops?
Well, Congress passed the Selective Service Act, and here's more about it.
Of the 400,000 African Americans that served in the armed forces, more than half of them served in France. The African American soldiers served in segregated units and were excluded from the Navy and Marines. Most African Americans were assigned to non-combat duties, although there were exceptions. The all-black 369th Infantry Regiment saw more duty on the front lines than any other African American regiment. 2 soldiers from this regiment received the Cross of War, France's highest military honor. How did the war affect mass production?
Well, I don't know. Let's ask Dwight.
Thank you for the introduction.
Fact.
The U.S. had to transport men, food, and equipment over the ocean without being attacked by German submarines.
Dwight, didn't the U.S. take 2 crucial steps to expand its fleet?
False. The U.S. took 4 steps. First, the government exempted many shipyard workers from the draft and delayed others from participation in the draft. Second, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce joined in a campaign to emphasize the importance of shipyard work. Third, shipyards used fabrication techniques such as building ship parts in one place and assembling them in another. Fourth, the government took over commercial and private ships and converted them for transatlantic war use.
How did the convoy system affect German U-boat attacks on merchant ships?
I'm not sure about that question, so let's ask Michael Scott.
Okay.
I knew you would ask me for help on this question, because I'm more than Dwight. The convoy system, which was a heavy guard of destroyers, escorted the merchant ships back and forth across the Atlantic in groups. By fall of 1917, shipping losses had been cut in half. The U.S. Navy helped lay a 230-mile barrier of mines across the North Sea to stop the U-boats. By 1918, the Germans found it difficult to replace their losses and to find new captains for U-boats. Well, obviously, the convoy system did it. That's what she said, because only 637 were lost of the 2 million Americans. What was the AEF?
The American Expeditionary Force, or AEF, was led by General John J. Pershing. The AEF included men from all over the U.S. The infantrymen were nicknamed doughboys because of their white belts they cleaned with clay or dough. Most doughboys never ventured far from their farms, so Paris made a vivid impression. However, they were also shocked by the unexpected horrors of the battlefield. So, Emily, what were the new weapons and how were they used?
Although some of these weapons were new, others like the machine gun had been so refined that they changed the nature of warfare. The 2 most innovative weapons were the tank and the airplane. Tanks ran on caterpillar treads and were built of steel so that bullets bounced off. The British first used tanks during the Battle of Somme, but not very effectively. By 1917, the British had learned how to drive large numbers of tanks through no man's land, clearing the path for the infantry. The early airplanes were so flimsy that both sides limited their use to scouting. After a while, the 2-side tanks used to fire enemy planes that were gathering information. Pretty soon, planes began carrying mounted machine guns. Also, airplanes were built to travel faster and carry heavy bomb loads. By 1918, the British had built up a strategic bomber force of 22,000 planes to attack German weapons factories and army bases. So, Mackenzie, how did the war introduce new hazards?
Well, new weapons and tactics of World War I led to horrific injuries and hazards. Constant bombardment and other experiences often led to battle fatigue and shell shock. Trench foot, which was caused by standing in cold, wet trenches for long periods of time, was a physical problem. So, Emily, what were some of the main World War I battles?
Well, there was Ypres. The 3rd battle lasted from July to November in 1917. The Allies won, but there were over 500,000 casualties. Cagney was in May of 1918. The U.S. troops filled the gaps between the French and British lines during a German offense. Chateau Thierry was in June of 1918. The U.S. troops helped to stop the German advance on Paris. Marne, the 2nd battle, was from July to August in 1918. It was the turning point of the war. The Allies advanced steadily after defeating the Germans. Saint-Mihiel was in September 1918. General Pershing led the American army to victory. Meuse-Argonne was from September to November in 1918. The American advance helped to end the war. So, who is this American war hero you speak of?
He was Alvin York, and he became famous because he sought exemption as a conscientious objector, or a person who opposes warfare on moral grounds, pointing out that the Bible says, "Thou shalt not kill." York decided that it was morally acceptable to fight if the cause was just. On December 8, 1918, York and other doughboys killed 25 Germans and captured 132 prisoners. For his heroic acts, York was promoted to sergeant and became a celebrity when he returned to the US of A. So, Emily, how did the events of Germany's collapse take place?
On November 3, 1918, Austria-Hungary surrendered to the Allies. On that same day, German sailors mutinied against the government authority. Everywhere in Germany, groups of soldiers and workers organized revolutionary councils. On November 9th, socialist leaders in Berlin established a German republic. The Kaiser gave up his throne. On the 11th hour of the 11th day, in the 11th month of 1918, Germany agreed to cease fire and sign the armistice. So, Mackenzie, what was the final toll of war?
World War I was the bloodiest battle in history up to that time. Up to 22 million people died, and more than half of them were civilians. More than 20 million people were wounded, and 10 million more people became refugees. The economic costs of the war may have been about $338 billion. The U.S. lost 48,000 men to battle, with another 62,000 dying of disease. More than 200,000 Americans were wounded also.